Folks, news is flying fast and furious. As you know, the administration teased a big announcement on the cause of autism today.
The autism is such a tremendous horror show, what's happening in our country.
Remember when President Trump suggested ingesting bleach as a cure for COVID? More recently, he claimed a link between autism and the painkiller Tylenol, or paracetamol as we know it here. The US Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., was right there with him. He has also blamed vaccines for autism when there is no evidence to support his claims.
Tylenol during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. Not good.
Autism has just been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. To steal a quote, that situation is not good.
President Trump's press conference about autism was the most irresponsible, dangerous speech that a president could make about public health for so many reasons.
But then we read another headline about autism, again from America, that piqued our interest.
The New York Times did an article this week, should autism be split apart? Should level 1 autism, formerly Asperger's, be separated and different from level 2 and level 3 autism?
Level 2 and level 3 autism are considered more profound and in need of more support.
But level 1 autism actually, in my opinion, is a neurotype. It's not a disorder or a disability. I know some of you may disagree, but I do agree that the spectrum should be split apart and autism level 1 should be separated.
But not everyone agrees.
Splitting those two diagnoses out potentially, I think, could cause more division and potentially cause more harm than good, actually.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, autism and splitting the spectrum into two. What would this mean for the 150,000 Kiwis born with the autism spectrum disorder? CEO of Autism New Zealand, Dane Dugan, joins me to talk me through this issue, as well as what it's like living with autism, the ongoing fight for diagnosis and support, and the fallout from recent headlines. I started our chat by asking him, what exactly is autism?
It's a difficult one. It's essentially a different way of seeing the world. The brain's wired differently. It is a neurological condition, I guess. And for us, it is, a very large circular need. And you met one autistic person, but you are born autistic, and how that shapes your life could be very much based on the right supports early on and then allowing you to live the life that you want to live as an autistic person moving forward. So it can sort of present itself with different social challenges as well, and sensory challenges and things like that. So, and as obviously we are going to talk about today, that circular need is extremely large. So for some people, they can go on and live the life that they want to live with some supports, and for others, they'll need 24/7 care for the rest of their lives. So that does create issues in how we communicate about autism, obviously, moving forward.
When you say the brain is wired differently, say for someone, say like myself, who doesn't have autism, for someone who does have autism, how do we operate differently?
So if you look at autism, somebody a few years ago took a group of behaviours together and called it autism. So any one of those behaviours or any one of those differences on their own may mean nothing, but when you group those together, it can be an autism diagnosis. And they are things like sensory overload. So if you're sitting in a room, for example, and there's a ticking or a dripping tap, for you, that might be fine, Amanda. For an autistic person, it may cause them real stress and unease. And it's the only thing they'll be able to hear when they're in that room, for example, and they'll need to get out of that space. It can be, in children, being a bit more fixated on, rather than the people and their parents and whatnot around them, it can be fixated on a more tangible item like a truck or something like that. And then in terms of large gatherings, it can be really difficult just with the sensory overload of a number of people. And then obviously with things like food as well, eating certain types of food, certain colours of food, etc. Versus, as I said, 24/7 care for the rest of their lives, and that's needed to help with everyday living as well.
Families of people with severe autism have become increasingly vocal about how they've been pushed to the sidelines because of the repeated expansion of the diagnosis. They argue the current one-size-fits-all diagnosis no longer fits, that the needs of some autistic people are so complex that they simply don't fit within the programs designed for the broader autism population. They want the autism spectrum to be split apart so that a person who has high needs and severe communication challenges doesn't get the same diagnostic label as, say, a highly intelligent verbal uni student who also has an ASD diagnosis. They believe this can deny profoundly autistic people the support they need and insist it's not about labelling for labelling's sake. It's about clarity that drives better policy, training, research and funding. I asked Dane what he thought of splitting the spectrum.
Well, I think the bigger issue is making sure everyone gets the proper care they need, and that's sort of what we advocate for across the board. Look, we do acknowledge that there are members of the autistic community that would like a separate category, and I think what that's commonly called is profound autism. And that can signal that an autistic person is non-verbal or has an intellectual disability as well. And we do acknowledge that can be quite challenging for those people and those families. That said, we take a neuroaffirming approach to how we talk about autism as well, and I feel like splitting the diagnosis up would probably be counterproductive and draw attention away from the actual issue at hand, which is a lack of understanding, support and accommodations for the autistic people as a whole. I do acknowledge that there are differences. You said spectrum, and we also say it's not a linear spectrum either, so that's the other thing. It is, as I said before, a circular need. So some people will need certain supports at certain times in their lives, whereas others will need different supports at certain times of their lives. And splitting those things out, or splitting those two diagnoses out, potentially, I think, could cause more division and potentially cause more harm than good, actually.
The splitting spectrum issue has divided families, and there are fears it will result in prejudice within the disorder.
We did a relatively big piece of work on language 2 or 3 years ago that was driven by the autistic community. And we talk about everybody having the right to refer to themselves, how they want to be referred to, and that's absolutely fine. But in general, as I said, people don't like that linear on the spectrum. It's more about, you don't carry around your autism like a handbag, I think is the word that some people use. You are autistic as part of who you are. And then it's just the level of need that you require. So you're looking at those people who present clearly that have a need, those more high complex needs individuals, I say generally get the supports they need. I say that a little bit skeptically, but because you can kind of see and understand what supports they need, it's a little bit easier from a getting the support perspective. Those who don't present outwardly as being autistic necessarily don't tend to get that support. And I feel like separating those two things out would be counterproductive in terms of the overall space within the autism environment that we operate in, because there is a massive need for our community who aren't necessarily high complex needs, but they get very little support. And what we're advocating for is everyone should have the support they need to be able to live a life that they want to live.
We'll get on to support in a second, but how easy or is it to be diagnosed at the moment, to actually see the right person to get the right diagnosis?
Yeah, really difficult. So we actually started our own clinic in Wellington about 4 or 5 years ago now for that very reason. You either have to go on a public, so this is for children, primarily you have to go on a public waiting list and there can be significant wait times for that, or you go private and that can be quite costly. For adults, we're hearing right now it's nigh on impossible to get diagnosed publicly. There is no real path to be diagnosed as an adult. So with our clinic, we focus quite a lot on very, very young. It's because autistic traits start to show as early as 12 months.
Wow.
So we've been focusing, and there's a really accurate tool out there that can actually pick up those signs and is 100% accurate at picking up something. And I think it's about 89% accurate of picking up someone who is autistic at that young age.
What are they doing at that age that would give away that they are autistic?
Yeah, so it's things like social type things. So rather than focusing in on their parents, they'll focus in on a tangible thing like the red truck. Eye contact may not be overly prevalent at that age. Language could be a bit delayed at 12 months. Those type of things that you would expect to see for people who are developing within their bell curve, that you'd expect to see some of our kids won't be developing that way. Any one of those behaviours on their own may not mean much, but again, if you group those behaviours together, then I think it's worthwhile. Well, obviously it's parent choice at a young age, but then it'd be worthwhile going through a process just to see, because as it sits now, and I know we'll get to support soon, but if you don't have a diagnosis of autism, you're not actually eligible for support as it sits now anyway. So to get that diagnosis is pretty important at an early age. So with our clinic, we've been focusing in on very young, because average age of diagnosis in New Zealand is about 7. So we're missing pretty critical stages of that young person's development to help them live the life that they want to live. And adults, because as I said, getting a diagnosis in adults, for a lot of adults tell me it was a really, really critical day in their lives because it put their lives into perspective for them. So we've been focusing in on those two kind of areas.
So how many officially in New Zealand, how many people have been diagnosed versus how many realistically have autism?
So we don't actually have numbers, and it probably goes back to what I was saying there, that getting diagnosed, there's many different paths to getting diagnosed in New Zealand. A lot of them can take a lot of time and cost a lot of money, but there are different areas. There's no one single path. So to capture that information can be difficult. We do believe the numbers that sit now is about 100. I think we say about 150,000 people in New Zealand would be diagnosed as autistic, and that intuitively sounds about right, probably. And about 1 in 30 odd children now are being born as autistic is the general stat across the Western world.
Worldwide data shows a steady rise in autism across most high-income countries. This data has sent public health experts, doctors, and anxious parents on a search for answers. Everyone wants to know, what could possibly be causing this?
Pharmaceuticals of different types,
air pollution,
gut microbiome,
genetics,
preterm birth,
pesticides,
infection, a fever,
mother's age, father's age.
I wouldn't call it a mystery. I would call it a complex problem.
Do you think, I know it's been a hot topic obviously with President Trump, but do you think we're just more aware of it now and that's why we're having an increase in diagnosis, or is there something else perhaps behind that?
I think there's twofold. I think definitely that awareness has caused or is an important part of that increase in diagnosis, and I think it's a positive thing. I don't think it's a negative at all. I've been in this job for almost 13 years, and I think due to the work of a lot of people in the sector, there is significantly more awareness of autism out there, and we have obviously increased education of those people that do diagnose, and also with the criteria changing over the years, we have seen more and more people who fit under the category of being autistic, which again I think is a positive, not a negative. We have also definitively proved that it's a genetic link now as well, so a lot of the time you'll go in and get a loved one diagnosed and look at someone else in your family and they might want to go in and get diagnosed as well. So because of that greater awareness and because it is a genetic link, I believe, and because we've changed the diagnosis criteria, that's why we are seeing more people being diagnosed. There's no real evidence to the contrary of that at this point in time.
It's interesting you say that, because I do know people who their children have been diagnosed, and when they get it, they're like, oh, this makes total sense to me, because they think that's my life.
Yeah, that's common. And again, it's personal choice, right? So we never, we're doing some work with the Social Investment Agency. We were one of the first organisations contracted, which we're very thankful for. And as part of that, it is identifying these children really young at that 12-month age and then putting the right support plan around them. So what I said before around having autism has been the gate to open the door to supports. In this particular project and program that we're working on, it's personal choice for that family whether they decide to get their young child diagnosed or not. We will still provide them support and an individualised plan to help that child go on to live the life they want to live and potentially need less supports as time goes on.
And let's talk more about this. Support in New Zealand for people with autism. What is available? What is needed?
Was a lot needed still. I think it has improved a bit. I mean, obviously the disability review is currently underway, and that's causing some angst within our community because people who are autistic were the number one people who were supported through disability support funding. Also, where the highest percentage of funding went to our community, which shows the need, I think. So number one, there's a massive need for support in our community. And again, it goes back to that circular need. So some people will need that 24/7 care for the rest of their lives. So that will be in some sort of residential care home, and that could be in a group home, it could be individual units, it could be whatever works for that particular person, and we'll need that support in everyday living constantly, versus some of our community who just need a little bit of help. Like if we look at employment, for example, we've got about 25%, I think, of our staff are now autistic, and that's great. And, we've helped about 170 autistic adults into work over the last 5 or 6 years, which we're really proud of. And all those people who were very capable of working. It was just finding the right match and an employer who was a bit understanding of looking at what that might look like, understanding social norms for the person that goes into the job, understanding what to wear to work, those type of things. So it's just creating a better understanding of what that autistic person may need. I did say this before. You've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So it makes it very difficult for me to say, if you do X and Y and Z, that's going to really make a better environment for that person. You have to understand the person and their individual needs. But generally, it'd be things like in a workplace, don't put the autistic person right next to the kitchen, for example, because there could be lots of smells coming from the kitchen in terms of people cooking or heating their lunch up, and that could be quite off-putting for people. Or right next to the water cooler, if that is actually a thing now where people talk around the water cooler, just that noise could be quite off-putting. And, if the person needs to wear headphones to help drown out some of that sensory noise or that noise, then that's also should be available to them as long as it doesn't impact negatively on their work.
What do you think the biggest misconceptions about autism are that you would sort of like to correct, whether that's in the workplace, the schoolyard, out on the street?
Well, firstly, I think probably being quite topically, I think it's the fact that you are born as autistic. I think that's the first thing we need to really dispel that myth. There's no evidence to suggest otherwise at all. So if you're autistic, you're born as autistic. So nothing the mother or anybody does before that person is born is going to make any difference at this point in time.
Now, President Trump has urged pregnant women not to take the painkiller paracetamol because of an unproven link to autism.
The meteoric rise in autism is among the most alarming public health developments in history. There's never been anything like this.
So I really want to dispel that myth that's been quite prevalent recently, number one. Number two, the other myth is that we are going to get people who go into work that will do jobs that others don't want to do and who are perfectly capable of doing those jobs. Again, it's just setting up the right environment. It's also the same in a schooling environment where if we get the environment right for our autistic tamariki in the school, that's going to help everybody else in that classroom as well. So a lot of the stuff we talk about is getting the environment right. It's generally in society that's disabling, not necessarily the autistic person that's disabled. So I use the example, and my research and advocacy manager used this with me the other day, and I thought it was really powerful. If anybody sees somebody in a wheelchair, you're not going to ask them to walk upstairs. That's just simply not going to happen. Whereas some of our people have a real issue potentially with showering because of the sensory feel of the water on their skin. But we expect them to just go and shower because we can't see the need of that person like you can with someone who's physically disabled. And I'm not diminishing the need for physically disabled at all. We just tend to cater for them a little bit better, I believe, than our neurodiverse community. So that myth, when somebody says they really can't go and have a shower or they really struggle to brush their teeth, it's trying to get an understanding of how we help them around that rather than just trying to force them to do it because we don't understand why they can't do that.
Interesting one for you here, Dane. Some critics sort of are arguing that autism is being over-diagnosed and every other person seems to be claiming they're on the spectrum or something. What do you say to that?
I think we're sitting in about a pretty good level. I think that understanding of autism, having people who feel like they may be autistic and going and getting a diagnosis is a really, really positive thing. And yes, the numbers are going up, but they're going up for the reasons that I explained before. It's not just because people want to go in and get diagnosed. I struggle to understand why someone would do that unless they are showing those autistic traits. And then I think it's really important for them to decide how they want to handle that. So I don't agree with that at all. And even getting a diagnosis of autism in this country doesn't open up the door to support automatically. You still have to go through and get your needs assessed, etc. anyway. So I still think I can't see the benefit of why people would want to go in and get diagnosed without having those traits.
Fair point. And you think, and just going back into that New York Times article, that if you get a diagnosis and then you're put into a split category or something, that's just not helpful. That'll just mean some people will miss out or be judged within a judgment, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I think those with high complex needs obviously deserve all the support that they get, and that's really needed. So I'm not diminishing that at all. And we are hearing the calls for sort of those new labels like profound autism to be a standalone diagnosis on its own, essentially. But we truly feel the need that there needs to be better choice and advocacy for the whole autistic community. And by dividing that out, I just think that could be counterproductive across the board for the entire community rather than, making sure that everybody understands what autism looks like and sounds like and how everybody is different, even in that high complex needs space. Everyone's needs in that space is different as well. So to create more division, I just don't think works. And as I said, we take a neuroaffirming approach to all our support anyway, and we look at what the strength of that person is. And I feel like if we were to split it out, I feel like that we're starting to look at things more in a positive and a negative frame, and I don't think that's helpful for anybody.
The role of media and also researchers and how we talk about diversity within autism and actually autism itself, how do we do that without creating stigma or confusion?
Yeah, so I think we've moved a long way in awareness of autism over the years, and I think that's a really, really positive thing that most people now would have heard of autism. I think I think as long as we keep talking in that neuroaffirming way, like, getting an autistic diagnosis in your family, it just means something different. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. So how do we go about talking about that in a positive way? And then how do we go about looking to set up that person for success and whatever success looks like for that person? And again, that can be very different. So I feel the role of media is not, I think, as we've had some people around the world recently talk about it as a epidemic, and that type of language can be really harmful for our community. Whereas if we say, okay, let's look at how we best support our community so they can go on to live the life that they want to live and make a significant difference out there in the world as well. Like, I don't want to have people think that this is everybody, but we do know that, Bill Gates was diagnosed as autistic.
Bill Gates spoke to CNN's Anderson Cooper about this earlier this year.
I was very slow to develop socially. I kind of rock. I concentrate intensely. My energy, my obsessions, fortunately, writing software being one of those, so that worked out well for me, marked me out as a very different kid in terms of my neurological style.
Your ability to focus as a kid and solve problems in your head, I mean, that you write about, it became kind of a superpower.
Absolutely. I wouldn't trade it despite the other limitations that it came with.
So we wouldn't have some of the amazing stuff that we have in this world if we weren't able to support our autistic young people to go on to live the life that they want to live and potentially do amazing things, but also potentially go out, get married, have kids like everybody else if that's what they want to do.
Love that. And Trump, and I don't want to dwell on this because we've done plenty on it, but his recent headlines, I mean, how detrimental, or on the flip side, good to get people talking about it, has it been?
Well, I think it was pretty busy for a couple of days. My week was certainly thrown into a bit of turmoil, to be fair, and there was a lot of conversations about it. But I think most people understood. I think there was probably some political pressure over there to make an announcement, to be fair. I said there's another interview. We shouldn't be taking our medical advice from the President of the United States or probably any world leader, really.
This includes US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Here's his take on autism.
This is a preventable disease. We know it's an environmental exposure. It has to be. Genes do not cause epidemics. They can provide a vulnerability. You need an environmental toxin.
It's kind of died down a little bit, I think, here in New Zealand. I think it's probably more harmful in America and in some of those other parts. I think here there's been no flow-on effect to date. But the language that was used was quite harmful. And it goes back to what I was saying before. Talking about it as an epidemic and how we need to stop autism, all that kind of stuff is really, really harmful for our community. So it's more, well, one, what he said, there's no real evidence to back it up at all. But two, the language that was used is just not conducive to setting up an environment that's going to help not only our autistic community, but everyone else out there in society as well.
Now, you have just been in the States. What can you tell us about what you may have learned or what you can bring back to New Zealand about autism?
The difference in America is it's very state-based, right? So some areas do things a lot different and potentially better than others. I do think there are some better paths over there, and I think they're a lot more mature in some areas in what they do in their supports around things like understanding the need to create independence. We're all big advocates for trying to get our children and then adults into a mainstream environment, whether that's in the schooling environment or whether it's university or onwards to employment. But what I did like in America is they seem to be a little bit better understanding that chucking our children into a mainstream school straight off the bat may not be the best bet. It could work for a lot of them as long as we get the right supports, training and funding right for that school. But for some of our children, being in a specialist school or having other options is still really important, as long as we're still trying to create independence for them as they get older. And I think just purely because of size over there as well, there are more choices for families to make and then autistic adults to make. But I think we're getting there. I think our neuroaffirming approach to autism is quite unique here in New Zealand now, and I think we're doing it in a really positive way and making sure, as they're doing in America now, Oz and Phoenix, and they do seem to do this very well, is ensuring that everything we design, like we do here in New Zealand, is designed with the autistic person as well. So it should be community driven. Community should have a big say in what we're doing, and getting those support rights for them can really help them, as I said, live the life that they want to live.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Dane Dugan. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Mark Chesterman. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.